Welcome. Come on in, find a seat, soldiers. Hmm. So I'll preface this now. If you don't want to be spoiled on anything, please get on out of here. With that out of the way, hey, let's get started with this debriefing. The game Wolfenstein: The New Order. It was a fast-paced and brutal historical fiction M-rated game that can take between 11 and a half to 12, 25 hours to beat. Developed by Machine Games and published by Bethesda Softworks. Became available to all platforms on May 20th, 2014. Now, remember when I do these debriefings, there are four main criteria I look at, which is visuals and graphics, audio/soundtrack, story, and gameplay. And each of those criteria start at 5 out of 10, but can go up or down due to various conditions that I'll go over as we hit each section. At the end, I'll give my final thoughts and the average total score of the game. Now, like always, let's start from the top with the visuals and graphics criteria. So, for this criteria, let's start with the condition of how unique I think the designs are, which is a positive 1.5 increase to the score. The reason for that increase is due to the fact that every type of enemy look different including between certain levels, i.e., the moon-based soldiers versus the normal soldiers. Only thing that wasn't unique is the fact that, like every other piece of alternate history media where the Nazis won, and they are depicted as extremely bland but futuristic and heavily industrialized. Moving on to the next condition, and being how good does it look? In which I gave it a positive 1.5 increase. That is due to all the models from the characters to the various weapons being well designed. They look like think they fit well in the world. Continuing on to the next condition, which is the ability to tell what and where things are, and it gives this criteria a 1.25 increase to the score. That increase is due to stealthily taking out officers, which shows the rough locations of collectibles. Well, I still had trouble spotting them, and even more trouble finding collectibles when I couldn't properly take out an officer. But with that said, I was able to find most resources and enemies quite easily. Finally, the last condition in this area is the amount of bugs, which didn't affect the score despite the fact that there were a few enemy models that got stuck on something or spazzed out for a second. Overall, there was nothing major. Hmm. Now, with that said, the criteria for visuals and graphics got a score of 8.75 out of 10. Alright, moving on to the next criteria, being audio/soundtrack. The first condition we'll be going over in this criteria is the quality of the voice acting, in which I believe it boosts the score up by 1.5. That is because everyone sounded unique and portrayed their character's emotions for each scene extremely well. Let's hop on into the next condition, being the quality of appropriate audio cues, which, in my opinion, is another 1.5 increase. That's due to each type of enemy sound like their corresponding buddies, as well as all heavy impacts, whether from heavy ass machines or just explosives, sounded properly impactful. Moving on to the soundtrack part of the audio soundtrack criteria, with the condition of the quality of the soundtrack, which gave it a bumping and 1.5 increase to the criteria score. The reason for that increase is because the background music always felt appropriate for what was going on, as well as they even turned specific famous songs from that era into ones that would fit in its alternate timeline. So, like, Alright, the final condition in the previous criteria being the amount of bugs and not affecting the score, well, it's going to be the same here. Now that brings us to the total for the audio slash soundtrack criteria being a 9.5 out of 10. The third criteria will be going over. We'll be done with the story, which has 4 chapters to it. The first chapter of this story is how engaging is it? It is so engaging that it deserves a 1.5 increase to the score. Now, what makes it so engaging is the fact that there are 2 main timelines, depending on who you sacrifice to Death Head at the beginning of the game, as well as meeting and exploring most of your allies' personal stories. The next chapter in the story is how unique is it, in which it was unique enough to increase the score by a single point. The reason it gets a middle of the road increase is due to the fact that a story involving killing Nazis has been done well over a dozen times by various series. But this is the first time in the Wolfenstein series that they actually give the main character, BJ Blazkowicz, a fleshed out personality to some degree. The third chapter in this little story is the quality of the world building, in which I believe it built up the score by 1.5. The bricks they use to increase the score are the fact that even if you don't look at and read all the various scraps of articles strewn about throughout all the levels, as well as they implement what feels like a proper amount of both show and tell, letting you experience and what it's like for BJ learning about all the changes that happened in the world while he was a vegetable. Now, on to the fourth and final chapter of this criteria story, being the ease of knowing what to do and where to go, which can take the score to a better area with a -1. The reason for this condition got scored so, is due to occasionally not knowing where to go, even with markers, as well as in the last few levels, not knowing how to handle some encounters, besides just throwing myself repeatedly at them until I finally got lucky enough to get past them. Overall, this little story wasn't that bad since it got a 7.75 out of 10. The final criteria we'll be going over is the gameplay. And just a heads up, only half of this criteria is in the positive. With that said, the first condition is how engaging is the gameplay, in which it was engaging enough to warrant a 1.25 increase. The increase is for the fact that it gave enough weapon variation and some of the enemies pose a nice challenge. My only issue is the fact that it seems like you really have to go completely out of your way to unlock some of the perks, as well as some of them just didn't seem that worth it to me. On to the final positive condition, and being how unique is the gameplay, which is also a 1.25 increase to the score. The reason for this increase is all the enemy variations, and how best to deal with them, as well as all the weapon variations and the various alternate fire modes. I just wish about half of the weapon wheel wasn't just dual wielding. On to the first negative condition, in which is the quality of the UI, in which it displays a -1. The negative mark is due to 2 reasons. The first being in the lock picking, in being a slight pain in the ass, but thankfully it was never done during stressful situations, like in a time crunch or in the middle of a fight. The second reason is the main reason, which is the weapon select wheel, and my beef with that is the fact that I hated dual wielding was on the wheel and on its own separate button. In turn, making selecting the weapons I wanted it to use a major pain in the ass. The final negative condition is if I needed to adjust the difficulty, in which I did, granting it a negative 1.5. Given the fact that the second to last level had me raging because I got stuck in a corner uh, with low health, no real armor, and barely any weapons. I was tempted to lower it then, but I was finally able to get past it. Now, it was the final boss, Mecha Death Head, that made me finally lower the difficulty down from normal to easy. Because not only was I having trouble figuring out what to do during the first phase of Mecha Death Head, but it was his second phase where I lowered the difficulty. Because after several tries of fully equipped and fully stocked up and still not doing enough damage to kill him, I said, fuck it. And I finally beat him after lowering the difficulty. Now, there is one more condition, but it didn't affect the score any, and it is the amount of bugs. Overall, the gameplay criteria broke even with a score of 5 out of 10. Now, I do believe it's time for us to wrap up this debriefing. I think Wolfenstein The New Order was a fast paced and brutal FPS game about an alternate history where the Nazis won World War II. It had pretty good visuals, great audio, pretty decent story, eh, but the gameplay could have been better. So overall, I believe it deserves 7.75 out of 10 medals. But now, soldiers, you are dismissed. I would like to thank all y'all for watching this shit show. Like what you saw, you're more than welcome to hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like to be a part of the show, you can follow me on my Twitch channel. Stay up to date whenever I go live or posting the new content. Hit those bell icons, join my Discord, and follow me on my X/Twitter and Blue Sky. I'm also sponsored by W Energy, which is a powdered energy drink company that doesn't leave you with any crashes or jitters. And let's not forget that it tastes good too. Here, if you'd like to save 10% off on your order, you can use my code KCMing10 at checkout. Save 10% off. All the links will be in my link tree in the description. And finally, since I'm new to posting on here, if you want to give me any tips, it'd be very much appreciated. With all that said, with much love to you, I hope to catch y'all later. Bye.